Good afternoon, everybody. We are very
Good
fortunate,
afternoon.
Dr. Monoj Panda from the Department of Philosophy, Presidency University, with us today. And Dr. Panda went to great length to be with us. There was a outage at his place, and he traveled all across the city to be here for you. He will be speaking on phenomenal consciousness and natural world, revisiting the debate between materialists and anti-materialists. Dr. Panda specializes on philosophy of mind, epistemology, philosophy of perception, and consciousness. He has published two very important articles. One is the non-conceptual content of perceptual experience and the possibility of empirical thought, which came out in an anthology called The Limits of Thought and Beyond. And very recently, he has published a fine article on mind in the natural world in search of an alternative naturalism, which came out in JICPR. So I welcome Dr. Panda and request him to start his lecture.
Good afternoon, everyone. I express my sincere gratitude to Professor Sen and Professor Nirmalanaran Chakravarti for giving me this opportunity. I also thank Bhakti Vedanta Research Center for organizing such a course. The topic of my discussion today is phenomenal consciousness and natural world, revisiting the debate between materialist and anti-materialist. I'll try to discuss the problem of placing consciousness in the natural world. And in that connection, I will try to, discuss the debate between materialist and anti-materialist regarding the nature of consciousness. Consciousness, as we all know, lies at the heart of mind-world relationship. And this mind-world relationship, philosophers have been struggling to explain since centuries. In fact, consciousness is something which makes the problem of this relationship a very difficult problem to solve. Because if we try to understand consciousness, we find that we realize that it is such a characteristic, or it is such a property of mind without which minds would not be seen as radically opposed to the body, the way it is seen by many philosophers. As we all know, Rene Descartes, who is very famous for making this distinction between mind and body, and which is widely known as mind-body dualism. If we try to understand the question, why dualism, we realize that it is consciousness which our minds have, or our minds are conscious. Because of that, minds are seen as radically opposed to the body. We do not, to be honest, we do not still have a clear sense of how our bodies can be conscious. Conscious experience may be regarded as one of the most significant phenomena of human life, because it is through conscious experience or conscious awareness we engage with people, we make sense of our surrounding. So conscious experiences contribute significantly to our life. Without having conscious experiences, we lose the very meaning of life. So our conception and understanding of life would be very different if it were not a conscious life. So to be specific, one can say that it is the phenomenological aspect of consciousness that makes our life enriching. Suppose, imagine that we are given with all the material objects and their properties in our experience without their phenomenological qualities or without their felt aspects. In that context, the givenness, the very givenness of these material objects will lose their very meaning, which our experiences are supposed to have. So, in a way, one can say that solving the mystery of life to a certain extent significantly depends on solving or explaining the mystery of consciousness. We face a great difficulty while trying to place consciousness in the natural world. Before we try to understand the difficulty that we face in placing consciousness in the natural world, we need to first understand the most common concept of consciousness and also the most common concept of natural world. If we look at if we try to understand the natural world, the most common conception of natural world, the natural world is a physical world. It consists of various things bearing physical properties. In our nature, in the natural world, there are mountains, rivers, and various other objects. These are some way, these are some ways or the other physical or material entities. Natural world also includes various individuals, humans or animals. Since natural world includes humans or animals, it also must include their minds, their conscious states. We are interacting with each other in our daily life. We are performing various actions in our day-to-day life. Obviously, we are not doing all this without having a mind or without being intelligent. Since we cannot live a normal life the way we live in this world without having a conscious mind, so the natural world must include consciousness in a significant sense. If this is the case, then the question arises, why are we so much worried about placing consciousness in the nature? Is it not already part of it? Is consciousness not already part of our world where we live? Let us take another example. Are we at all philosophically worried about situating a table in a room? Are we at all philosophically worried about situating a building in a campus? We just choose a particular place in a room, then we place a table there. So here the question that can be asked is, can we not place consciousness in the similar way? By finding a designated place the way we do it in the case of table or in the case of a building. Many philosophers, they answer to this question saying, no, we cannot place consciousness in the natural world the way we place tables, chairs, or other material objects in the natural world. We cannot simply place consciousness in the world the way we place other things in the world. But the question is why? Why is it so problematic to place consciousness in the natural world? It is because all these objects, tables, chair, mountains, rivers, etc., are physical in the obvious sense. But according to many, we cannot say that consciousness is physical in the obvious sense. We still lack enough explanation as to why consciousness is physical, why consciousness is material. Even if we agree that it is material, even if we agree that it is physical, it is not material or physical the way tables, chairs, mountains are physical. Though one can say that we do not exactly know the nature of consciousness, but it seems to us intuitively supported, supported by the absence of an empirical account, that the nature of consciousness is very different from the nature of all the remaining entities in our world. Consciousness is something subjective, whereas other entities in the world are objective in nature. Consciousness obviously is not given to us in the way other physical objects are given to us. The self-givenness of consciousness seems to be non-physical. We do not have a physicalist account of how consciousness is given to itself. It is therefore we face a great difficulty in placing consciousness in the natural world, in relating consciousness to the natural world. One might think in this context, as one of the important philosophers of our time, David Chalmers, who is the author of The Conscious Mind, who has suggested that consciousness is a natural phenomenon, but it is not a physical phenomenon. How can consciousness be natural without being physical? One can ask, can something be natural without being physical? Chalmers, in this context, also makes a distinction between natural laws and physical laws. Consciousness may not be subject to physical laws, but it is subject to natural laws. One can also think of the difference between natural property and physical property. I mean, there are various other notions in the world. It is difficult to think about those notions in physical terms. For example, the notion of morality, the notion of good, the notion of justice, the notion of beauty. These notions, we do not have a clear explanation how one can explain these notions in purely physical terms. And this has several metaphysical implications. So it seems that we need to have different ontologies in order to place consciousness in the natural world. Consciousness, it seems, belongs to a different ontology in comparison to the material objects, the physical objects. Even then, if we subscribe to this view that consciousness belongs to different ontology, the problem would occur as to how one ontology can be placed in a different kind of ontology. What actually is the relation between consciousness and the natural world? Let us now briefly try to understand what is phenomenal or phenomenological aspect of consciousness. If we discuss, contemporary philosophy is, full of literature on phenomenal consciousness, but I think the starting point was Thomas Nagel's paper, What It Is Like to Be a Bat. According to Nagel, phenomenal features are features of purely subjective experience. Phenomenological features of our experience are subjective features. They are experiences, or they are features from a subjective point of view. I mean, we experience various things from a particular point of view, which is called the subjective point of view. So this domain, this phenomenological domain, is something which we cannot share with anyone else. Each and every conscious being, we have a different phenomenological domain, which can only be known from his or her point of view. My phenomenological domain can only be known from my point of view. So it leads to the point that my consciousness can only be studied from my point of view. And this phenomenological domain is constituted by, as I said, by purely subjective and phenomenal character of subject's experience. Gregory McCulloch, another very important philosopher, who says in this connection, I quote, "The phenomenological is all to do with the subjective, how it is in people's minds from their own point of view," unquote. So, as I said, phenomenological domain is necessarily related to the subjective point of view of the individual, whose phenomenological domain it is. If we look at Uriah Kriegel's analysis, we find that consciousness, this phenomenal character of consciousness, can be expressed as there is something bluish way it is like for me to have the experience when I am having an experience of blue sky. So when I'm experiencing blue sky, there are two interrelated components involved, according to Kriegel. One is the qualitative character, and the second is the subjective character. Here, in this example, the bluish component of my experience of blue sky is the qualitative character, and the subjective character refers to the point that the experience of blue sky is not just an experience, it is also an experience of a particular subject. So the subjective character is constituted by what it is like for a particular subject to have an experience. And we can call it, following many other philosophers like Dan Jahavi and others, for me component. Kriegel also calls it for me component. So the particular phenomenal conscious state the subject is undergoing is due to the qualitative character that phenomenal state has. It is a phenomenal state irrespective of its particularity. It is a phenomenal state. Why it is a phenomenal state irrespective of its particularity? because it has the subjective character, which is the involvement of subjectivity of the individual. So Kriegel, though Kriegel suggests that an account of phenomenal consciousness must incorporate these two features, it would be interesting to see how these two are related and yet different from each other. One can ask in this context, is it plausible to claim that the qualitative character of a particular experience is solely due to the property of bluishness? Or is it plausible to claim that the qualitative character of that experience is due to uh, that object called blue object or blue ball? For example, Fred Driscoll and others, Fred Driscoll says that there is nothing in the experience of blue rather than the blue object. But so that is the question. If my experience of blue object involves my subjective character, then what it is like for me to experience the blue object, is it solely due to the property of that object? So here, in relation to this question, one can say that the for me-ness component, the subjective point of view, plays an important role in making every experience a phenomenal experience. Let us now consider a set of phenomena which are also associated with consciousness. Philosopher David Chalmers has made a famous distinction between the easy problem of consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness in his paper, Facing Up to the Problem of Consciousness. So there is a set of phenomena. For example, we have the ability to discriminate or categorize various stimuli or various sensations. Our cognitive system integrates various information that it receives from the environment. We have the ability to report our mental states. We have also the ability to to access our own internal states. We have the ability to be attentive about something or to pay attention to something that is going on in our surrounding. We can also control our behavior deliberately. These phenomena are also associated with the word consciousness. Chalmers says that these phenomena, science is very much successful, as modern science has been very successful in explaining these phenomena. There is no doubt that, in order to explain consciousness, we have to explain these phenomena, as we call them, the conscious phenomena. For example, controlling one's own behavior is a conscious phenomena. We need to explain the way our cognitive system processes or integrates various information. Chalmers is of the opinion that if we look at the recent development in cognitive science and neuroscience, we find that there are different successful explanations of these phenomena. Science is successfully explaining these phenomena associated with consciousness. at least science is able to explain some of these phenomena, and there are, of course, different cognitive and neurophysiological models through which we can explain these phenomena. So in principle, science can science can explain this phenomena. It is also at the same time, one can say that we do not have a detailed or complete explanation of these phenomena right now. But somehow we have a clear idea. Chalmers suggests that we have a clear idea what the complete explanation would look like. So once we have more advanced explanation of these phenomena by cognitive scientists and neuroscientists, we will be able to explain all these phenomena without fail. So according to Chalmers, the problem of explaining these phenomena is called the easy problems of consciousness. These are called easy problems of consciousness because, as I told, science has made considerable progress in explaining these phenomena. Of course, the term easy is a relative term in this context. The term easy, it is called the easy problem of consciousness, not because these problems are really easy. These problems are not easy at all. It takes years and years to solve the problems of neuroscience or the problem related to the brain. So it might take another few centuries to have a complete explanation of these phenomena, but we do have a clear picture what a complete account of the functioning of brain is like. Please remember that the problem is, as I said, is not called easy problem because the process of explaining these phenomena is easy. It is called easy problem because science has made considerable progress in explaining these phenomena. However, Chalmers and many other philosophers have highlighted that there is an experiential and qualitative aspect of various conscious phenomena. There is a subjective inner perspective attached with every mental phenomena we talk about. When we possess a thought or when we perceive something, there is, of course, an information processing going on in our mind. But Chalmers suggests that this information processing has a subjective character. And our conscious states are, in this sense, called the phenomenal states. Following Nagel, again, we can say that there is something it is like for a subject to experience. There is something it is like for a subject to think. There is also something like for a subject to be conscious or to have consciousness. So questions might be asked here: why the information processing in our mind, in our brain, is accompanied by our subjective inner life? Why a particular experience is someone's experience? Why my experience, for example, is not your experience? Why at all each conscious experiences of ours involves a first person perspective? Why my conscious experience is necessarily related to my first person perspective? Chalmers here suggests that these questions cannot be answered by following various solutions to the easy problems of consciousness that we discussed earlier. We do not have a clear picture how various brain states give rise to conscious experience. And since these questions cannot be answered by following the solutions to the easy problems of consciousness, the problem, the problem arises due to these questions cannot be called the easy problems of consciousness, because the solutions to the easy problems of consciousness are not simply working here in order to solve the problem that we just discussed. So this problem is called the hard problem of consciousness. And this hard problem of consciousness is the problem of explaining the experiential perspective that each of us have. So the hard problem of consciousness, of course, as I said, is closely related to the subjective character of experience. At this juncture, one might ask, is there anything over and above our body, our physical body, because of which we are conscious or we possess various experiential states? That would be a very difficult position to claim. So the point here is neither that a physical system cannot give rise to consciousness, nor that there cannot be any neurological basis of consciousness. That is not the point behind highlighting the hard problem of consciousness. The point rather is that the hard problem of consciousness, so far as the scientific progress is concerned, is not being explained sufficiently. I mean, it is true and plausible to hold that conscious experience arises from a physical system. Otherwise, the whole thing would look very mysterious. I mean, why I'm having conscious experience then? I mean, so it is plausible to hold that our brain states give rise to consciousness, but we do not have a clear explanation as to how it gives rise to consciousness. So the motive behind stressing or highlighting on the hard problem of consciousness is not that consciousness is not in any way linked to a physical system. I mean, those who are talking about hard problem of consciousness, they are also trying to find out the solutions from science, that whether science can really explain the hard problem of consciousness. If we look into the various attempts to find out the neural correlates of consciousness, one can realize that there is still no scientific theory which can explain how various kinds of brain activities or any other kinds of activities which can explain how all these give rise to consciousness. We also do not have the idea how this is possible remotely. Here the question arises, what exactly do we expect from a scientific theory of consciousness? We need some laws or principles which can state precisely which particular brain activity can cause conscious experience of tasting, for example, lemon. We also need to ask the question, why this particular activity does not cause experience of tasting curd rice? Why this particular activity is responsible for tasting lemon and not curd rice? So there is a need to identify specific brain activity associated with each conscious experience. If at all, we propose that conscious experience is, nothing but some kind of illusion created by the brain or the activity of the brain, then also we need to come up with principles or laws which would explain these processes and which would explain why these processes create some illusions. Some philosophers might say that consciousness is nothing but um, this felt aspect or this phenomenal aspect is nothing but the illusion created by the brain. So we also need to explain, when and how each specific conscious experience emerges. Very interestingly, Donald Hoffman, in his book recently, which came recently, The Case Against Reality, he suggests that, cats cannot do calculus and monkeys cannot do quantum theory. So why assume that Homo sapiens can demystify consciousness? Perhaps he says that we do not need more data, scientific data. Perhaps what we need is a mutation that lets us understand the data we have. So this is a very interesting claim made by Donald Hoffman. So it is interesting to see how various responses have evolved in relation to the hard problem of consciousness in our philosophical literature. Some philosophers they stress on the point that consciousness is neither physical nor natural. It is anti-material or supernatural. One could very well vouch for a separate metaphysical realm of consciousness, which is radically or dualistically opposed to the physical. So I mean, it seems that this account, purely supernaturalistic account of consciousness, is problematic to hold because if we consider the various developments of neuroscience and related disciplines, um, this position becomes very an extreme position to hold. Another extreme position is widely available in contemporary science, which tries to reduce consciousness to certain physical properties while denying any sort of subjective, phenomenal, or experiential character of consciousness. They do not even acknowledge that there is a hard problem of consciousness. They try to explain consciousness by denying the very existence of consciousness. This is, most of the scientific literature are holding this position. The third kind of solution that we can think of is developing a non-reductive account of consciousness, admitting that the subjective or phenomenal property is the very essence of consciousness, and this subjective aspect cannot be reduced to certain physical properties. But however, this account does not rule out the possibility of developing a naturalistic account of consciousness, as Chalmers and others have been trying to develop. So the point here is a naturalistic account of consciousness need not necessarily be a reductive account. There are various versions of naturalism proposed by many philosophers in contemporary philosophy. Two very important I can remember, David Chalmers and John McDowell is another philosopher who is trying to propose a alternative form of naturalism. So many of us think that there is a problem of consciousness, which science finds it very difficult to explain, and that is the hard problem of consciousness. And this leads to another problem of consciousness, and that is the meta problem of consciousness. And what is the meta problem of consciousness? I'll discuss very briefly. I have not gone into the details of the meta problem of consciousness. This meta problem of consciousness, as Professor Chalmers suggests, is the problem of explaining why we think that there is a hard problem of consciousness. I mean, we have already discussed that, even after considering all the cognitive and behavioral functions of the brain, we do not have any clue as to how and why consciousness originates from all this. There is one behavioral function, however, which is closely related to the hard problem of consciousness, and that is called the phenomenal report. For example, we report that there is a hard problem of consciousness, or we say that it is hard to see how consciousness could be physical. Explaining behavior, we also say explaining behavior does not explain consciousness. We report all this. So the meta problem refers to the problem of explaining these problem reports. And that's why it is called meta problem. The problem of explaining why we at all claim that there is a hard problem of consciousness. And some people would say this is one of the easy problems of consciousness, because this is related to reporting something, or reporting a particular phenomenal, particular state of ours. So if we accept that all human behavior can be explained in physical or functional terms, as is the case with the easy problem of consciousness, then we should also accept that the problem reports can also be explained in terms of physical and functional. So this is another aspect of the hard problem of consciousness, which leads to the meta problem of consciousness. And many scientists these days are responding to this meta problem of consciousness. Let us now discuss some specific types of materialism, as in contemporary philosophy in relation to consciousness. Many of us are aware that there are various standard arguments against materialism in relation to consciousness, and there are primarily three arguments. That is, the knowledge argument, conceivability argument, and the explanatory gap argument. The famous knowledge argument, as you might know, is proposed by Frank Jackson, the Australian philosopher, where he claims that Mary's phenomenal knowledge of color red is different from her physical knowledge of color red. When Mary comes out of her black and white room and experiences red tomato, she realizes that her phenomenal knowledge of color red is, was not actually captured by her physical knowledge of color red when she was in black and white room. So this knowledge argument, as I said, is proposed by Frank Jackson in his paper, Epiphenomenalism and What Mary Didn't Know. And he suggests that, he tried to imagine a thought experiment where, Mary is a physical scientist who has, hypothetically speaking, all the physical knowledge, or all the scientific knowledge of the color red. But unfortunately, she was confined to a black and white room. And throughout her life, she has experienced only two colors, black and white. But, the physical science or modern science would claim that physical knowledge is the complete knowledge. And if there is knowledge of something, it has to be a physical knowledge. Then, if not, then it is not a knowledge at all. So, Mary, being a competent physical scientist, she has all the physical knowledge. Mary one day comes out of her black and white room. She is released from her black and white room, and she is roaming around the vegetable market, and she experiences the red tomato. And she realizes that, here in this context, the question can be asked that what would happen to Mary's previous knowledge of red when she was in black and white room? Jackson and many others are arguing that she would realize that how impoverished her knowledge was when she was in black and white room. It is about many things. It's about the color experiences of not just her, it is also about other minds, how, what others must be feeling when they go through a particular kind of experience, color experience. So here, the point of this argument, knowledge argument, is that the phenomenal knowledge of color experience is not captured by her physical knowledge of color red. The conceivability argument, on the other hand, suggests that, if it is possible to think of zombies, which are, molecule for molecule identical to the original beings, then consciousness must be something non-physical. Otherwise, it will be not possible for us to explain as to why two beings, in spite of molecule for molecule physically identical, one is conscious and the other lacks consciousness. So here, those who have proposed this conceivability argument, they claim that if it is possible to think of zombies are the duplicate physical beings but lack consciousness. And there are two beings, one is original and another is zombie, physically they are absolutely identical, and one is having consciousness and another is not having consciousness. If another, the zombie, the duplicate being, is lacking consciousness, in spite of being physically identical, then then consciousness must be something which goes beyond the realm of physical. Otherwise, zombies uh, uh, would not have, you know, otherwise zombies uh, must be having, uh, consciousness. Let us, in relation to these, uh, arguments against materialism, let us now, very briefly discuss various types of materialism, uh, as discussed by David Chalmers in his paper, The Place of Consciousness in Nature. Please remember that these are not specific materialist theories, rather these are different types of materialist theories, because one can say that many specific token theories could be part of a particular type of theory. So one uh, who understands the difference between type and token in philosophy would understand um, uh, uh, why these are called different types of theory and how various token theories could be part of these types of theories. As I said, these types of materialism, are discussed by David Chalmers in his paper, The Place of Consciousness in Nature. And these types are called type A materialism, type B materialism, and type C materialism. What is type A materialism? Type A materialist would say that there is no epistemic gap between physical truths and phenomenal truths. As we knowledge argument, Frank Jackson would say that there is an epistemic gap between Mary's physical knowledge of tomato and uh, phenomenal knowledge of tomato. Uh, Knowledge of phenomenal truths, they would, type A materialist would say, is not radically different from knowledge of physical truths. And against the conceivability argument, they would say that it is not conceivable that there are zombies. What does that mean? That means if there is a physical system which is molecule for molecule identical with one of us, then that physical system must be having consciousness. And against the knowledge argument, type A materialist would argue that Mary is not ignorant of any phenomenal truths while she was in a black and white room. When Mary, comes out, I mean, there are, various responses to Jackson's knowledge argument, various interesting responses. Some people, some materialists would say that, when Mary comes out of the black and white room, she acquires at maximum is what she acquires is an ability. So according to type A materialist, there is, this is a very important claim, there is no distinction at all between the easy and the hard problem of consciousness. And if we can solve all the easy problems of consciousness, then no hard problem remains. If we look at type B materialism, type B materialist, they acknowledge there is a subtle difference between type A and type B and type C. Type B materialists acknowledge that there is an epistemic gap between physical truths and phenomenal truths. That means for them, what it is like to know physical truths is, is different from what it is like to know the phenomenal truths. But this epistemic gap does not lead to an ontological gap between physical truths and phenomenal truths, because the ontological basis, they would say, is the same. And against the knowledge argument, type B materialist would claim that Mary, in fact, is ignorant of some phenomenal truths when she is in black and white room. In fact, in spite of having all the physical knowledge, she could be ignorant of some phenomenal truths, but that is not a problem, because the ontological basis of these phenomenal truths is the same, and that is the physical reality. So there is no reason to suppose that phenomenal truths leads to a different ontological reality related in relation to consciousness. So epistemological gap between phenomenal truths and physical truths, according to type B materialist, does not really lead to an ontological gap between them. But the problem we face in this context is that if there is an epistemic gap between physical truths and phenomenal truths, then how can there be not an ontological gap? Can we say that there is not an ontological gap, or there is no ontological gap, without appealing to our knowledge? If we cannot say that, if we cannot say without appealing to our knowledge that there is no ontological gap, then there is no reason with us to say that the ontological basis of the phenomenal truths is same, and that is the physical reality. About the distinction between easy and the hard problem of consciousness, type B materialist make an interesting claim. They would, in fact, acknowledge that there is a hard problem of consciousness, and this is different from all easy problems of consciousness. But when we try to solve the hard problem of consciousness, we do not have to, refer to an ontological reality which is different from the physical reality. In relation to type C materialist, they would in fact acknowledge that there is a deep epistemic gap between physical and phenomenal domains. And type C materialism is very, interesting. There are many philosophers who really these days go for type C materialism. They acknowledge that there is a deep epistemic gap between physical and phenomenal truths, but in principle it is closable, and that means that gap, that epistemic gap, can be bridged. So what does that really mean? It means right now, considering our limited conceptual resources, it seems that there is an epistemic gap, but in future it can be closed by the development of science. Now it seems that zombies are conceivable, depending on our conceptual resources, but they will not be conceivable, considering the future development in cognitive science, neuroscience, or considering depending on our future conceptual revolution. So when we say that zombies are conceivable now, that means by our present rational reflection, we are able to say that zombies are conceivable. But our current rational reflection depends on our current cognitive processes. But type C materialist would suggest that under an idealized rational reflection, a perfect rational reflection, zombies will not be possible. Van Gulik has argued that once we have a good explanation of consciousness, zombies will no longer be conceivable. So considering type A, type B, and type C materialism, there are several common elements we find in these three types of materialism. And one most common element is that consciousness is nothing but physical in nature. And another very important element is that we find in all these types of materialism is that scientific account of consciousness is possible. In this context, one might say that, if we try to problematize this, the possibility of scientific explanation of consciousness, one might say that the nature of consciousness is, subjective, whereas the nature of science is objective. And that is a very basic distinction we make. And in this context, one might ask, then how can there be a science of consciousness? Thomas Nagel, for example, says that there is a need of objective phenomenology. We already have, since many years, done Dennett's heterophenomenology, which can be considered as objective phenomenology. But when we try to explain consciousness or conscious phenomena by following heterophenomenology, the subject of various conscious phenomena, unfortunately, ceases to be a subject. And as we know, Dennett's intuition pumps, which he discussed in his paper Quinine Qualia, and he devised these intuition pumps to actually, to flush out and flush away the qualia. These intuition pumps, in fact, flush away the very subject of consciousness, the very subject who is having different experiences. So in various materialist theories, there have been, several attempts made to, find a specific location of our conscious phenomena. For example, maybe, a particular group of neurons in our brain, somebody might say, that is responsible for a particular emotion, and another group of neurons is responsible for, feeling, for the feeling of a particular kind of pain. And, in this context, I am reminded of a very famous statement made by my favorite philosopher, John McDowell. He says, our mental life takes place where our life takes place. So the very question of finding a particular place for consciousness in the natural world is really misplaced. And let us assume that science will make more progress in explaining consciousness, and scientists, say that consciousness can be explained by science in principle. But the problem is not about whether science will make more progress or not. The real problem, I think, is the direction in which science is, progressing to, to solve the problem of consciousness, and that is problematic. In most materialist theories, we find that the attempt is made to locate mental state in particular place of our brain, and this is very much part of their strategy, and this is very much part of their methodology. And this attempt is, this endeavor itself is problematic. you know I mean, I'm not saying that science will not be able to explain conscious mental phenomena, but for this, I think they need to reconsider their methodology and strategy. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Manoj. I'm now requesting you to ask any questions if you have them.
Good afternoon, sir.
Satyavrat is here. Yes.
Yeah. My first question is from the point of view of conceivability argument. I mean, the supporters of this argument, are they saying that the philosophical zombies having some kind of senses? Because the popular notion of zombies is that they do not have consciousness, but they do have some kinds of senses. If they are accepting this, then are you making or the supporters of this argument making a distinction between having senses and having consciousness? I mean, one can have bare senses, but that doesn't lead to having consciousness.
Yeah. There is a distinction between. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there is a distinction between having senses and having the phenomenal quality of experience. Suppose you are given $1,000, or maybe more than that, okay?
Yes.
And asked that, see, you will have all the experiences, particularly you will have the experience of the world's most famous ice cream, okay, from wherever you want, okay.
Yes.
You will have that through your senses, okay. But while having that ice cream, you will not have any phenomenal feel. Okay. So if you don't have any phenomenal feel while having a particular experience, actually you are not having experience. You are not at all having experience. So what is working here? Your senses, the way your senses, our senses work functionally, okay. These are working. We have like, we can call it receptors. Our receptors are working. We can receive information, like the camera receives certain information and processes it, but without having the subjective point of view, which zombie lacks. We cannot call it an experience. So there is a distinction between having senses and having experiences. But our senses have the phenomenal feel. I mean, we receive the phenomenal feel from various experiences through our senses. So fortunately, we have that.
Okay. My second question is, sir, regarding the type C materialists. Are they say there is a gap from the ontological point of view between the physical world and the world of consciousness? I mean, is it
No.
only from epistemological point of view?
Yes. I
Then
mean,
how they are differing from the type B materialist? I mean, you told the type B materialists are also saying that there is an epistemological gap. So if type C materialists are also saying that, then how they are differing from the type B materialists?
yeah, there is no ontological gap for type C materialist, but they would say that it seems that there is an ontological gap. It is because our conceptual resources at present uh, are very limited.
Okay.
Maybe we need a conceptual revolution in science, not in philosophy. That's what they would say to um, explain consciousness. So in future, considering the progress, the way we are science is progressing, in future there will be no problem in explaining consciousness. So along with the epistemic gap, they also think that there is an ontological gap, but uh, you know we think that there is an ontological gap, but in fact there is no ontological gap.
Okay.
Yes, but
And
they
sir,
would not admit that there is an ontological gap.
okay. And sir, another question is regarding my phenomenal experience or anyone's phenomenal experience. Is it possible to articulate or communicate about someone's phenomenal experience through public languages? I mean, if I want to study consciousness from the first person perspective, is it possible to construct the discourse or that discipline? Because in order to do that, I need to communicate. And I am having a phenomenal experience and it is only for me. It is a private content for me. I can't communicate about it with anyone. So is
Mhm.
it possible to communicate about it with anyone through public languages?
It is possible to communicate, I think.
Okay,
Yeah. Uh, it is not possible to share. Sharing means you cannot have my experience. Okay. In that sense, um, you cannot have my first person perspective. You cannot have my subjective point of view. But I believe that when I say that Satyabrata, I am in pain, I have um, severe headache. I also at the same time believe that you understand what I'm trying to communicate, isn't it?
yes. Okay.
So, but you cannot understand um, the perspective from which I have this experience of mine.
Yes.
And so I understand I'm trying to understand your question. So, this is precisely the problem, how to develop uh, a subjective methodology
Yes, exactly.
to study
Yes. That is what I'm asking.
and we face difficulty actually we face difficulty there uh, the very it seems that the very methodology, the very notion of methodology has to be objective.
Yes.
Hello, sir. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sir, my first question is the term physical and natural. Can you please explain little bit about physical and natural? I mean, these two terms is totally different from each other, or they are related to each other. And
Yeah, you
okay,
see,
sir.
yeah, I mean, uh, there are various physical properties, any object that we have in our day-to-day life have they are considered as physical objects, and these objects have uh, various physical properties. Okay. the properties which are explained by physical science, modern science. But I will give you another context. For example, you say that suppose you on the road while you are walking, you see that a blind person is trying to cross the road, and nobody, people are you are at a distance, and nobody, there are so many people around him, and nobody is helping him or her to cross the road, and that person is finding it very difficult to cross the road, and you from a distance, you see it and say that this is wrong. I mean, this is obviously wrong. Okay, and I mean, this is not right. Okay, and when you say this is not right, this is naturally not right. This is we don't have a sense. How can, I mean, we don't have an we cannot clearly explain how this is not right in purely physicalistic terms. But we have the sense of why this is not right. We understand why this is not right. But if I ask, if I am asked, please explain in purely physical terms why not helping a person crossing the road is not right, I cannot probably explain that. So here there is a distinction between, if you see, physical and natural. But but naturally, this, I mean, very obviously, this is right for many of us. As Professor Bilgrami says, I see cruelty. I see the pond. I see the person. I see a person is obstructed to take water from the pond, and I see all these things, and it is also natural for me to see that there is cruelty. It is very obvious that it is cruelty. So something can be naturally part of our life, but we do not have a clear physicalistic explanation of them. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Sir, my another question is it really possible to explain
Mohua,
all phenomena?
Mohua,
Yes,
sorry.
sir.
I think Professor Bishwas will be here in any second. Can we wind it up? Can you please write your question in the
Okay, sir.
chat box?
Yes,
And
yes, ma'am.
sir can respond on the chat box.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry
okay,
about
ma'am.
this, because we have already asked him to join half an hour late.
One of my students, yes. Discuss later. Okay, ma'am.
ठीक है. Okay, so I really don't know how to thank Dr. Panda, because you cannot imagine how far he traveled just to do this lecture, and he hasn't had his lunch. He rushed here. So thank you, Dr. Panda, for this excellent lecture. And I particularly enjoyed your retort to Mohua. So thank you. And I thank you on behalf of myself as well as BRC for coming and speaking here. Thank you. Thank you.